Starting April 26th, store Wayfair's best deals, like up to 80% off area walls, up to 60% off outdoor furniture, up to 70% off bed, and more exclusive blockbuster deals. Plus, store free shipping on everything. Even the big stuff. Wayday starts April 26th, so mark your calendar and start filling your cart.
Terms of a trade deal, and China is not happy about this. CCP is calling this deal quote-unquote US bullying. You see, right after this trade deal, India announced that they will increase imports from the United States and decrease imports from China. And on top of this, just a day earlier, India also said that it will be placing more tariffs on goods coming out of China. After seeing what's happening, CCP is realizing that the US plan is working. You see, Trump tariff on China weren't just about trade with China. That's because we roughly get the same amount of Chinese goods from other countries than what we get from China. And that's why this time around, President Trump wanted to target not just the Chinese trade, but Chinese goods trade that are happening through these other countries. And that's why every single country has a simple ultimatum. They cannot help China circumvent our tariffs. And this is why CCP is furious. Here's what they said.
China holding an informal United Nations Security Council meeting tomorrow, accusing the United States of bullying by weaponizing tariffs. Chinese diplomats sending a note to all 193 UN members saying, quote, by weaponizing tariffs as a tool of extreme pressure, the U.S. has gravely violated international trade rules and triggered severe shocks and turbulence in the world economy and multilateral trading system, casting a shadow over the global efforts for peace and development.
Look, the official meeting tomorrow, the title is Bullying and Unilateralism. It is nothing. Less than Orwellian to see the communist regime of China organizing a UN meeting accusing the United States or any democracy of bullying. Let's recall, this is a regime that as a matter of practice bullies their own people and bullies their neighbors. It's a country, any country that recognizes democratic Taiwan gets threatened by China. Any country that stands with the persecuted Uyghur minority gets bullied by China, and I've seen it at the United Nations in Geneva when the Chinese ambassador sent threatening letters to any other country's ambassador who would show up at a meeting for the persecuted Uyghurs. And the South China Sea, China bullies its neighbors in the South China Sea. So the notion that Beijing, that the communist dictatorship of Xi Jinping is organizing a UN meeting to condemn the U.S. for bullying is Orwellian and, frankly, brings new meaning to the words irony.
It's truly laughable that the CCP is calling out other countries for bullying, because this is what CCP is doing. In Canada, as the election season is going on, CCP has been caught trying to interfere with Canadian election. They've been accused of trying to discredit a candidate named Joe Kay. According to the report, CCP has been using platforms like TikTok and Facebook to push fake information about the candidate so the voters lose their trust. Now, why is CCP doing this in Canada? Well, because the candidate in question is critical of CCP's actions in Hong Kong. CCP is not a fan of criticism, and they'll do whatever it takes to silence critics. This is why we ask you guys for a favor. Please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below, because it helps us out tremendously in the algorithm. Now, here's what we know about the agreement between United States and India. This happened while JD Vance was visiting India and meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, this is why this trip was such a big deal. Vice President Vance lands in India amidst massive trade tensions. India must open its market to the United States, and doing so could spark a boom in both countries. Key detail everyone's missing: Trump's February meeting with Modi wasn't just diplomatic theater. Behind closed doors, major moves were made on oil, gas, and LNG deals. But India's 70% tariff on US cars versus pre-Trump 2.5% is exactly the kind of unfair trade practices Trump has been fighting. One-way free trade isn't free. US is the world's largest consumer market, and everyone needs to sell here, so they need to open their markets too. Now, on top of this, Trump is also pressuring India to open up their market to American retailers. And this is where things do get a little interesting, because many American companies had been treated very unfairly in India, at least in my opinion. You see, in 2018, Walmart bought a majority stake in Flipkart.
They laughed when I made that pink salt recipe that works like the Brazilian weight loss pen. But they shut up real quick when they saw my 27-inch waist at work. I started using this 3-ingredient pink salt recipe last month, and I had to stop because I was losing all my clothes way too fast. My doctor literally...
which is basically like India's Amazon. This was roughly a $20 billion deal where Walmart paid $16 billion to own roughly 77% of the company. Now, this was by far one of the biggest acquisitions in Indian history. And just a year after this acquisition, what does the Indian government do? They changed the law to make it harder for foreign companies to compete and sell in India. This law was really specifically targeting Amazon and Walmart. Just a year after, Walmart paid so much money to buy an Indian company. This wasn't a very business-friendly law, and this is something President Trump is pushing against right now. President Trump reportedly intends to press India to give online retailers such as Amazon and Walmart full access to its $125 billion e-commerce market. Now, while JD Vance was in India, this is what he had to say about stuff like this that foreign countries do, and on top of that, the new deal that India and US have negotiated.
This, of course, with Prime Minister Modi. And look, President Trump and I know that Prime Minister Modi is a tough negotiator. He drives a hard bargain. It's one of the reasons why we respect him. And we don't blame Prime Minister Modi for fighting for India's industry. But we do blame American leaders of the past for failing to do the same for our workers. And we believe that we can fix that to the mutual benefit of both the United States and India. But President Trump and Prime Minister Modi announced in February that our countries aim to more than double our bilateral trade to $500 billion by the end of the decade. I know that both of them meant it. And I'm encouraged by everything our nations are doing to get us there. As many of you are aware, both of our governments are hard at work on a trade agreement built on shared priorities, like creating new jobs, building durable supply chains, and achieving prosperity for our workers. In our meeting yesterday, Prime Minister Modi and I made very good progress on all of those points. And we are especially excited to formally announce that America and India have officially finalized the terms of reference for the trade negotiation. I think this is a vital step toward realizing President Trump's and Prime Minister Modi's vision, because it sets a roadmap toward a final deal between our nations. I believe there is much that America and India can accomplish together.
Now, that speech was at the end of the 2-day trip that JD Vance made to India. At the beginning of that trip, when he landed in India, we also had a very shocking announcement come out of India that many people are overlooking. You see, India just announced that it has put another 12% tariff on Chinese steel to limit cheap imports from China. And the reason for these tariffs are simple. Steel has been one commodity that CCP has used to hollow out other countries' industrial base. Let me explain what I mean by this. You see, CCP gives out a lot of free money in form of subsidies to steel companies in China so that they can build up bigger and bigger factories. Now, of course, this is something a lot of countries do. They support their growing industries by giving them subsidies and tax incentives. But CCP has taken this to another level. And that's because CCP's goals are much more sinister than just supporting a growing industry. You see, CCP kept on subsidizing the Chinese steel industry even after the local steel demand was met. That means China had more than enough production to fulfill all the demands that Chinese customers have for steel. But the goal for CCP wasn't just to satisfy Chinese customers. The goal was to flood the foreign market with cheap Chinese steel so that foreign steel companies just go out of business. Think about it. Let's say you're an American steel producer. You have to put in your own money to buy a land. You have to put in your own money to build a factory. Then you have to put in your own money to pay your workers, buy materials, and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, you can take out a loan, but at the end of the day, you're going to get a loan on market rate. You know, whatever everyone else is paying, that's what you'll have to pay. Then, once your steel is produced, you take it to the market and you hopefully sell it for a price so that you make a little bit of profit. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're taking so much risk by putting in so much of your money to make profit. But the equation for Chinese steel companies is drastically different. Chinese companies don't have to worry about paying rent because CCP just gives them a lot of free money as subsidies. They don't have to worry about paying interest if they take out a loan because CCP owns the state banks and they are ordered to give loans for either no interest or cheaper rates. On top of this, sometimes CCP also helps subsidize the supplies that go into producing steel. This way, when a Chinese company goes to a foreign market to sell their steel, they can sell it for a much lower price than any other competitor. And this is how CCP wants to drive out foreign producers out of business. The plan is simple. If foreign companies can make profit, the foreign factories will shut down. That means if there's ever a war, foreign countries will not have these factories producing the ever important steel. At the end of the day, many people forget how important steel is. It's a national security issue, and that's exactly why US was so hesitant to let Japan buy US steel. Japan is a very strong US ally, and even then we didn't want to take on that national security risk. Now, of course, we can argue if that was the right decision or not, but UK did something similar, but this time UK probably had more of a reason to do it. They stopped a Chinese company from buying UK steel because you can realize this, what China is trying to do, and they cannot have that kind of national security issue in their own backyard. Now, of course, that was a big sidetrack, but hopefully you guys understand why India is now tariffing Chinese steel. Because same as US and UK, India doesn't want their steel companies to go out of business because of Chinese steel dumping. And of course, along with this tariff, India has also announced a trade terms deal with the United States. Now, we don't exactly know what it means, and the wording was very specific. They're not saying that a trade deal was agreed on. It's just trade terms that have been agreed on. What it seems like, they have agreed on what they need to negotiate on. So they have, I guess, narrowed down the points they're going to negotiate on. Of course, we'll get more information and I will share it with you guys as we learn more. But even this, China is not happy about, and China really wanted India to come to their side. Of course, China has been looking for allies all this time, and we've been covering that. But right after Vice President JD Vance visited India, China sent out their own offer, I guess their own invitation to Prime Minister Modi.
Well, folks, the day we've been waiting on has finally come. National Concealed Carry Reciprocity is here, meaning that if you got yourself a valid CCW permit, every state's got to recognize it, just like a driver's license. How about that? It's about time we got some good news for us law-abiding Americans who believe in our God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now, let me tell you, getting your permit has never been simpler. All you gotta do is punch in your zip code, answer 6 little old questions, and boom, you're all set. I went through the process myself. Didn't even have to step foot in one of them fancy classrooms. Took me all of 5 minutes on my computer, and and I had that permit in my mailbox the very next week. Talk about convenience. And here's the best part. When it's time to renew, there ain't no requalifying or dropping a pile of cash on some stuffy course. You can skip all that nonsense. But listen up. These anti-gun, anti-freedom liberals are having a hissy fit over this. They hate seeing good folks like you and me exercising our rights without jumping through their hoops. They're doing everything in their power to slam this online CCW loophole shut by the end of the month. So don't let them win. Go on and lock in your permit right now before the system gets swamped or they pull the rug out from under us. Trust me, you don't want to miss this window and lose out on the chance to be grandfathered in. Just click the link I'm sharing, fill out those quick questions, and you'll be on your way to carrying nationwide without any liberal busybodies breathing down your neck. You'll thank me later for sure. God bless America, and God bless our right to protect ourselves. Tap that link below now.
Offer was simple. Come to Beijing and then India will get an offer that it will not be able to refuse. Unfortunately for Xi Jinping though, Modi kinda just ignored this invitation because based on all the reports, it seems India just never replied. They never said yes, they never said no. But the Chinese action does tell us one thing that we have been saying for the last few days on this channel. CCP and Xi Jinping are trying everything and anything in their power to get more allies on their side. You guys remember it all started with the fake news that came from the Chinese state media. The report said that it was China, South Korea, and Japan who were partnering up to respond jointly against the tariffs that President Trump announced. Hours after this report came out from Chinese state media, both South Korea and Japan came out publicly and said there were no such discussion. They never agreed to anything like this, and they have no clue where China got this idea. Then after this fake news, Xi Jinping went on his charming trip, I guess, where he went to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia. And he wanted to convince these countries that China is a better ally than United States. And he wanted these countries on his side. But unfortunately, this trip didn't really yield much result either.
Now, China is also trying to extend the cooperation with regional neighbors. She just went on a trip to several of them last week. What does that mean for the global market?
Well, it's interesting because these are neighbors with whom China has a lot of differences, and with the trade political differences and territorial differences over, they all have claims to different territories, and there's been a lot of China trying to build too much influence in these countries. Then comes the trade war, and suddenly they're all competing. They're all trying to form a bloc. Xi Jinping wants to form a bloc because they're all going to be. They're not going to be able to export as much to the US under the trade war. But at the same time, these political differences are there. So there's a sort of a difference between balancing the economic and the political here. And it's going to be a challenge because I think even though people do want some help in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Malaysia, and these countries in dealing with the US trade war, they're going to be struggling though to find common ground on a lot of other areas with China. So after that visit to Vietnam, Malaysia, he didn't really come away with any. They said they were, the optics were very good, but they didn't really come away with anything firm on how to deal with the trade war.
Now, of course, the optics for this trip was good because Xi Jinping did sign a few deals with Vietnam, but at the end of the day, he didn't get what he wanted. He wanted Vietnam to be on China's side and not negotiate with the United States, and that's clearly not happening. In fact, as soon as Xi Jinping left the country, Vietnam bought 26 US F-16 fighter jets. So like I said yesterday, I don't know what he said to Vietnam, but it was most definitely the greatest sales pitch for US defense industry. Similar things are happening in Vietnam. After China denied Boeing planes that Chinese airlines had bought, it seems that countries like India and Malaysia are now competing to buy those planes because countries are seeing an opportunity to benefit all the while China is shooting itself in the foot. You see, it takes 7 years to put in an order for Boeing 737 MAX plane. And China is now just not taking in the orders that they have placed. The planes are ready and China is sending it back. So these countries are saying, hey, we'll take them. We don't want to wait 70 years for the plane that we wanted to order. Why not just take the one you were going to give to China? So Xi Jinping was trying to put a ban on Boeing planes to hurt the United States economy, when in reality, Boeing has a long order backlog, so it isn't really going to be a problem for Boeing, at least for not next few years. But the reason China is so badly looking for an ally is because Xi Jinping realizes China cannot survive this trade war without other countries. China is way too dependent on the United States, and on top of that, US is offering these countries a deal that they cannot refuse, when in reality, Xi Jinping is telling everyone that he wants to offer countries deal that they will not be able to refuse. Here's what I mean. Look at this report. I keep hearing that the US will drop tariffs on countries that agree to match US tariffs on China. If true, this is a smart policy. It builds alliances, strengthens global pressure on China, and rewards fair trade. Sure do hope this happens. Now, this does sound like a good idea, but it's unlikely something like this will happen because this seems very, very extensive. Even though it's a good idea, it seems too good to be true. But one thing that US has been trying to do is isolate China. And what I mean by that is any country that wants to negotiate a trade deal with the United States, one thing they have to agree to is not help China circumvent the US tariffs. And this is something that goes back to 2018 when President Trump first put tariffs on China in his first term. What China basically did was they agreed to some terms but didn't really follow through. On top of that, CCP devalued their currency so that tariffs basically cancel out. And on top of that, China started using other countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Mexico, where Chinese goods are made in China, then shipped to these countries where these companies have warehouses, and the whole purpose of the warehouse is just to switch out the label. The label that says made in China gets switched out to made in whatever country the warehouse is in. Now, this is highly illegal when it comes to international trade, and this is exactly why US is now asking every country, I guess, not nicely, very forcefully, that they need to start enforcing this rule. And we are seeing results already, because see what South Korea just caught. They caught a Chinese company trying to do the exact thing that US said China has been doing, and it will not accept it anymore. Now, clearly, China was not happy about this. China didn't want countries to crack down on its illegal practices. So this is what China did. China has banned South Korea from exporting goods containing its rare earths to the US military contractors or the US military, warning of swift retribution for failure to comply. Like I said, CCP is trying anything and everything. They cannot decide if they want to sweep top other countries to becoming China's ally, or if they want to bully other countries to become China's ally. But one thing CCP realizes, and that's for sure, CCP cannot win this trade war alone. They need other countries, and they cannot depend on Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
We'll see what happens, but ultimately they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. So we want them involved, but they have to, and other countries have to make a deal. And if they don't make a deal, we'll set the deal because we're the ones that set the deal. Scott and Howard, and myself, and others, we're going to be setting the deal. And it'll be a fair deal for everybody, and it'll be, I think it's a process that's going to go pretty quickly. We've spoken to many, many countries, and we're getting their views on things. You know, there are a lot of things. They have VAT taxes. They have everything you can have. Don't forget, as an example, the European Union was set up to take advantage of the United States. That's why it was set, and they've done that. But they're not doing that anymore.
YouTube is growing so fast that it has just overtaken Netflix to become the most popular app on TV. That's just on TV, by the way. If you combine TV, phones, computers, tablets, people are spending an insane amount of time
YouTube just not like your
YouTube.
TV
This
at
is
home.
exactly why YouTube is paying creators $45,000 per minute. That's $64 million every single day. So, if you have ever thought about starting a YouTube channel for yourself, now is the perfect time. And if you're looking to learn how people grow on YouTube in 2025, like this guy who got millions of views in just a few months of starting a channel,
They got millions of
then
dollars,
I
though?
have a solution for you. This weekend, I'm holding a free bootcamp for beginners where I will share all our YouTube advice and answer any question you have about growing on YouTube. If you're interested in learning from this bootcamp, you can sign up by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen.
If feet are numb and the sensation won't go away, do this 30-second biblical ritual to relieve nerve pain. Christians, did you know there's a biblical...
Fair deal with China from Trump. I like that.
Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: President Trump saying the U.S. is actively talking to China to get a fair trade deal. On comments about trade between Washington and Beijing.
We are going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Solar panels from Chinese-owned factories could face massive new tariff rates, some as high as 3,400%. Details on the Chinese-made panels that aren't from China. How is the trade conflict between the U.S. and China expected to play out? An expert breaks it down.
You're seeing that China's trying to stimulate, give people money to spend, and yet people are holding on to it.
And a foreign agent case is scheduled to go to trial this summer. Linda Sun, former aide to two New York governors, facing accusations that she helped further Beijing's interests while serving as a state official. We have the latest.
They got that Chicago mayor, Brandon Johnson, for fucking spending that fucking $30 billion on those immigrants, but not fixing the fucking roads for the residents that live here.
The U.S. is actively talking to China to get a fair trade deal. That's what President Trump told reporters early Wednesday as the administration signals room for tariff adjustment.
Can you clarify, Mr. President, on China?
Yeah, we are going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing. They know that they can't get away with it any longer, but they're still going to do fine. And we're going to have a country that you can be proud of, not a laughing stock all over the world for many years.
Chinese goods to the U.S. now face up to 245% tariffs, while U.S. goods on China are subject to 125% tariffs. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Wednesday that if the U.S. sticks with its tariffs, Beijing would do the same. Trump previously warned China that the U.S. will set the deal if Beijing doesn't make a trade agreement and end tariffs.
Ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. So we want them involved, but they have to, and other countries have to make a deal. And if they don't make a deal, we'll set the deal.
Trump also signaled some level of tariff relief for China. He said tariffs on Chinese goods would come down substantially, but it won't be zero. That was in response to comments describing the trade tensions as unsustainable. Trump imposed tariffs on trade partners to reduce the trade deficit and bring jobs back to the U.S. The total U.S. trade deficit reached over $1 trillion last year. The White House says it has hollowed out America's manufacturing base and forced the U.S. to rely on foreign adversaries for defense and medical goods. Trump said the U.S. is set to rake in profits from tariffs and that the days of countries ripping off the U.S. are over.
China is an example, but it's not just China. European Union.
Yeah, China.
They
Yeah,
ripped
Europe,
us
you're
off
not
for many,
taking our
many
lunches
years.
and no more.
And those days are
And
over.
my
We
carton
make a
of
lot
milk.
of money for our people.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Wednesday said there's an opportunity for a major trade deal between the U.S. and China.
China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world.
Bessent also added that China was in need of a rebalancing and needs to change. Which U.S. states will feel the greatest impact from China's 125% tariff on American exports? Topping the list, Texas, California, Washington, Louisiana, and North Carolina. That's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. These states make up the bulk of U.S. exports to China, energy and agricultural products. Here's a breakdown. In 2024, Texas mostly exported energy to China. For Washington state, its exports to China include aircraft, spacecraft, fruit, seeds, and grain. Louisiana exports energy and agricultural products like grain to China. California exports machinery, medical instruments, and electronics to China, while North Carolina mostly sends over pharmaceutical products. Zooming out, President Trump imposed tariffs on goods from China with the goal of reducing the U.S. trade deficit and bringing jobs back home. China has stood out among other trading partners for its unfair trade practices, including theft of U.S. intellectual property. The estimated loss from that IP theft falls between $200 billion to $600 billion every year. Staying on duties, the Commerce Department has announced what could be the highest individual tariff rate yet, a sky-high potential maximum of roughly 3,400%. A penalty that could apply to some solar panels made by China-owned suppliers, which ship to the U.S. Chinese-owned solar factories that operate across Southeast Asia have long offered China a unique loophole. They allow Chinese-made solar panels to flow into the U.S. while while avoiding U.S.
That's so
tariffs.
close.
That's because despite the manufacturers being Chinese-owned, the products are at least partially made in other countries and shipped to the U.S. from there. To target the gap, the Trump administration on Monday announced potential tariffs targeting some solar panel imports from Southeast Asia. 4 solar panel makers in Cambodia could be hit with individual tariffs reaching 3,400%. That's including Chinese solar module manufacturer Jinko Solar, which runs some of its operations in Cambodia but is headquartered in Shanghai, China. Some companies operating in Thailand will face tariffs of around 800%, while those in Vietnam are looking at a potential 543%, and others in Malaysia could see rates climb to 169%. China controls roughly 90% of the market share in critical parts of the solar supply chain, meaning these Chinese-owned companies remain major suppliers of solar technology to the U.S., and because they're based in Southeast Asia, their exports often come in below U.S. market value. That undercuts American companies, pushing domestic solar products out of the U.S. market and costing American workers their jobs. The U.S. International Trade Commission is set to make a final decision on the tariff rates on June 2nd. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told investors he believes a trade deal with China can be reached. NTD's Carrie Dunst spoke to Tim Dosher, executive director at Unleash Prosperity, to discuss the issue.
Trump is pushing for a fully reciprocal trade agreement with all nations, while also looking to onshore production of precisely the things that are made in China, right? Steel, pharmaceuticals, electronics, solar, shipbuilding. So how do you expect the balance to play out between protecting industry but also having trade reciprocity with China?
Well, I think, there's so many things wrapped up into that, but I think the big word there is retail sales. Both in China and in the United States of America. And I think that that's where this is coming down. If you look at the past 8 quarters in China's economy, you're seeing that China's trying to stimulate, give people money to spend, and yet people are holding on to it. So there's a hesitancy in China. All the while, you have Trump saying, hey, we're going to slap this massive tariff on you, potentially stalling goods from moving into China, into the U.S. And so I think China's really in a bad position right now. As you heard Caroline Levitt say, the numbers. She talks about the numbers. And I think when you start to dig deeper into China's economy, you start to see that China needs a deal with the United States. Like I need to get rid of this bad artwork in this hotel room I'm in right now. So it really is an interesting point that we're in right now in this economy. And I do think that a deal will be struck very soon. It's just a matter of Alright,
I gotta get to my van. I got hot pockets in it. I'm pulling in the airport, so I missed my turn. I was doing that. Forgot to turn on the parking garage. Alright, well, let's go. Share thumbs up, yo.
5%. Trump says that's egregious and it will come down significantly. On the other side of the spectrum, we just reported the political pressure internally that she is under. So where do you think we might net out on the rates?
It's a good question. And again, I think that's going to be, what Trump always says when people say, well, tell us exactly what you're going to do. And he says, that'd be the stupidest thing in the world to tell you what I'm going to do because that would, impede my ability to negotiate. And so I think that right now is being worked out. I think that's all the scuttlebutt that we're hearing behind the scenes. But I will say this, while I make the case that, the retail is going to hurt those in China, it's also going to hurt us. There's no question about it. We have become reliant on cheap goods coming from China to buy on Amazon, to buy at other retailers, through Walmart, things like that. And if we continue to keep with high tariffs on, we will feel that as consumers, and we will begin to start checking our bank accounts and our wallets and say, do I actually need to buy that ring light? Do I need to buy whatever that cheap product from China is? So I think we want to get as low as possible with China, while at the same time continuing to hold them accountable for the cheating that they have been doing for years against the United States of America.
And I want to get into that in a second, but I do want to go more to the tough medicine that those are Trump's words and what you're describing. Is that just part of the process of being able to onshore things that we need for national security?
Look, and this is one of the arguments that as we talk about tariffs, especially in the mainstream media. I mean, how irresponsible is it that we're not talking about the reason that we're doing these tariffs, according to the president, which is national security? He's doing this under his under executive order by the statute IEEPA, which allows him in emergency circumstances to implement tariffs unilaterally without Congress, which you're normally supposed to do. So we can't lose focus of bringing some of these crucial sectors back to the United States of America for our national security. Look, talk to any person in the military who can speak without violating their top secret clearance. And what China is doing in the South China Sea, on that side of the world, is unheard of. It is unparalleled. And it's almost, they're war games, basically, playing against us that we're financing by continuing to prop them up, by continuing to use them. They are not our allies. They are our enemies, especially militarily. And so when you talk about onshoring, bringing those things back to America, we could... the friend countries that we can have a better relationship with, get a good deal, and also be able to accommodate the workforce. Because in America, look, unfortunately, a lot of those jobs we do not have the workers for at this point. So we will need a little bit more time to do that fully onshore.
Next, updates on a landmark foreign agent case, the United States versus Linda Sun. A judge announced the case is scheduled to go to trial in late July. Here's what happened on Wednesday in the Eastern District Court of New York.
Earlier today in the Eastern District Court of New York, Linda Sun and her husband, co-defendant Chris Hu, appeared alongside their attorneys for a court conference. The polished look couple allegedly earned millions of dollars in kickbacks for their ties to the Chinese regime. During the court meeting, a prosecutor revealed that they are finalizing Chinese translations of evidence against Sun. Those include text messages, emails, and other communications between Sun and Chinese officials. These materials are expected to be made public during the trial. Sun served as New York Governor Kathy Hochul's top aide in charge of Asian affairs. In 2023, Sun was fired for misconduct without specifying reasons. Last September, federal law enforcement arrested her and her husband. They now face multiple criminal accounts. Sun is accused of acting as an unregistered foreign agent of Communist China, making her case one of the most high-profile cases of its kind. The government accuses Sun of furthering Beijing's interest while being a state official, including disclosing internal COVID-related meetings to Chinese diplomats and blocking Taiwanese officials' interactions with two New York governors. Images show Sun had attended multiple meetings hosted by China's spy agency and other state entities.
Coming up, many restaurants in China pulling American beef from their menus. More on why they're switching and what they're switching to. 20 humanoid robots joined a half marathon in Beijing. Who came out on top? Vice President J.D. Vance concludes his visit to India. What did he leave behind, and where are U.S.-India relations headed? An expert chimes in. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. U.S. beef is one of thousands of products hit by the trade war between the world's two largest economies. And in many restaurants in Beijing, even American-style steakhouses, kitchens are switching to Australian beef instead.
The U.S.-China trade war means American beef, the star of the menu at this Texas-style smokehouse in Beijing, will soon be off the table. U.S. beef is an unaffordable option after Beijing's 125% retaliatory tariffs on top of an existing 22%. Come May, diners at Home Plate BBQ will be tucking into beef ribs, brisket, and sausages, still done in the style of the American South, but mostly sourced from Australia. Operations Director Charles DePaulette says the switch to brisket from Down Under is 40% cheaper than continuing to buy American.
Once we deplete our stocks of that, we'll be switching fully over to Australian M5. We're pretty happy with it. We still think it's the same taste and quality and flavour, but we've had to switch just due to market pressures and the tariffs. Stocks are low in China and the prices have doubled.
Pork isn't exempt either. He says their ribs will soon come from Canada. Even before the trade war began, American beef was expensive, partly because of shortages caused by years of dry weather. Those higher prices were already hard to swallow for consumers in China's weak economy. Local university student Yan says he eats imported beef once every few months because the taste is so good. So he doesn't mind forking out the extra cost once in a while just to experience it. He also says that great flavor isn't exclusive to the US and that he's happy to try beef from anywhere. Homeplate BBQ's experience is being repeated across Beijing's restaurants. That's according to a beef supplier based in the capital who spoke anonymously because of the sensitivity of discussing tariffs. While the $125 million worth of beef the US sends to China every month is a sliver of trade between the two sides, its disappearance in China is a glimpse of what's to come for other goods. Tian Chenshu, a senior economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, says China seems to be lowering its dependence on US exporters.
I think there's an additional layer, which is China is intentionally hitting the U.S. farming sector, which means that U.S. farmers will be very difficult to find an exemption from China. Yeah, so I think essentially the beef trade will be blocked. Yeah, and I mean Chinese importers or U.S. exporters need to find something alternative markets.
He estimates across the board 80% of US-China trade is being hit by mutual tariffs. And he says that will only deepen the decoupling between China and the US in terms of trade.
Uncertainty amid tariffs. Next, let's take a closer look at what some American liquor businesses are facing right now and how one bar owner in California is adapting.
Like many industries affected by Trump's wave of tariffs, the liquor business is facing a period of deep uncertainty. In Oakland, California, William Choi prides himself on the global flavors available at his bar Viridian.
We definitely use Ming River Baijiu coming out of China. We have cognac from France. We have rum from, Barbados. We have whiskey from Japan.
Tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump are targeting dozens of countries, including those where Choi sources his spirits. Imports from the European Union, Japan, and Mexico face tariffs between 20 and 25%, while those from China have been slapped with the highest rate of all at 145%.
It's like riding a roller coaster. One day we're like, okay, well maybe, and then the next day it's like right back down. So we're just in a very constant state of flux, I would say.
Choi says he's already raised prices as high as he can. Now he'll just have to get creative to stay afloat, like creating a homemade acid solution to replace limes or slightly lowering the amount of alcohol in drinks.
I mean, we're very resilient. We've learned to be. We've had to be, and so yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I mean that's just the world we live in right now.
The tech race between the U.S. and China spans several major areas, and one of them is humanoid robots. The biggest concern that they could serve military purposes as well as civilian ones. 21 humanoid robots joined thousands of runners at a half marathon in Beijing on Saturday. It's the first time these machines have raced alongside humans. Let's take a look.
Humanoid robots raced against humans for the first time in a half marathon in China's Beijing on Saturday. The robots were accompanied by human trainers who sometimes had to physically support the machines during the race. One of the robots fell over at the starting line and lay flat on the ground. Another crashed into a railing after running a short distance, causing its human operator to fall over. The winning robot, Tiangong Ultra, finished in 2 hours and 40 minutes. A long way to go before it can surpass the men's winner, who finished in 1 hour and 2 minutes.
Tool. Vice President J.D. Vance just finished his 4-day visit in India. India is hoping to strike a trade deal with the U.S., its biggest trading partner, before a 90-day pause on steep U.S. tariffs runs out. How will J.D. Vance's visit influence U.S.-India relations? To discuss these latest developments, NTD's Steve Lance was joined by Mark Gober, author of the book An End to the Upside Down Reset.
Mark Gober, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Ugh.